soon be erased. The mother soul must reign.
Hello and welcome, Exiles, to the DPS version of the Archmage Stormweaver. Now, before we get into too much, I just want to say that was on a level 19 Lightning Conduit, and that was without a 6 link. We did not have considered casting, which is a 40% more damage. It's the best link. I wasn't even using it on. I had it on my Spark. And why is that? Number one, I killed Arbiter in a second. I don't need the damage. Number two, I am a cheapskate. 6 links are like 3 divines, and level 20 gems are like 3 divines, and I didn't want to spend the money, and quite frankly, it was not necessary. The bosses simply are not tanky enough for it to matter. When you go to the DPS setup, there's going to be scenarios where, for example, I've been doing a lot of Delirium maps where I'll see the name tag pop up, Omniphobia. He's not on my screen yet, and before I see him, he is dead. He has died to a spark that went off screen, triggered a lightning conduit, and a lightning bolt from God has smited him off the face of the planet. And by the time I get over, he is just a pile of simulacrum splinters on the ground. That's the level of damage we're talking about here. It's just, you start not even knowing certain monsters exist. And the gameplay, I gotta be honest, it's almost kind of, I hate to say it, but it's almost a little bit boring. When everything's dead off the screen, it feels a little weird, but that's currently the state of the character. I wanted to showcase this because there's some people that just want this level of damage. Full preface, or full, I guess, advice from myself as I'd say, it's so much damage, it's unnecessary. The DPS we had before was plenty to kill basically everything in a few seconds, and this, you sacrifice a lot of your defenses to do it. Mainly what's happening here is you're giving up the Everlasting Gaze, which gives you a bunch of energy shield for an amulet that just has plus levels, percent mana, flat mana, spirit, cast speed, damage stats. You're giving up a lot of your, essentially, defense to get damage. Now, how does this end up trading out? We lose about 6,000 energy shield between our previous version, and we lose actually a bit of mana. Now, technically, me losing mana is more of just a gearing issue. If I had better, if I had better gear, technically the mana would go up. For example, this amulet could have quality on it. I didn't even put quality on it. I kind of forgot. I just remembered just now while making the video. And it could have percent mana and stuff like that. It should end up, actually, this version of the build should be able to get higher mana, but it's contingent on how good is your gear. And my gear, or my amulet, isn't like an Omega insane amulet. It's enough to have damage, which is basically just having plus levels and a bit of mana on it, and it also gives me enough spirit to put on my cast on shock. Now, why are we doing cast on shock, and what's going on? How are we achieving the spirit for that? That is via 2 items. It's via our Warrior's Invictus, and it's by the spirit from this amulet. This can also be done via just a rare chest piece with a lot of spirit, which is expensive, or it can also be done via, if you don't get spirit on your amulet, for example, the Against Darkness Jewel can roll with spirit on notables. Like, for example, if I put it right here, I think maybe all 3 of these notables, or at least 2 of these notables, are within range, and we would get spirit, 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 which would allow us to reserve cast on shock when combined with the spirit from warriors. Basically, you need a combination of 2 things. You either need your chest piece with spirit plus an amulet with spirit, or you need an Against Darkness spirit, or if you're really lucky for some unknown reason, technically, if you Valorb a spirit corruption on your helmet, that is also a possibility. But the reason for doing that is essentially Lightning Conduit just does a ridiculous amount of damage. I didn't really feel like it was necessary before, but after trying it, I gotta be honest, it's a little bit addicting. And it can take variations of the build, which are a bit, more mid-level gear. It can give you a giga buff to your overall DPS. And I'd say, after trying it, it's definitely worth it. That is a huge amount of additional damage. Even though we already deal a ton of damage with Spark, Lightning Conduit is just that chunky, meaty hit that just instantly wipes a lot of bosses. And sometimes you just don't even know what the HP number the boss had because they died in one hit and you didn't even get to see the text pop up. Now, Warriors versus a rare chest piece. I have some examples here just so I can show you what is the opportunity cost. Number one, Warriors requires 51 dex and 51 strength, so it's a bit harder on your attributes. Previously on my character, I had about 37 strength to be able to equip this shield, and I think I needed about 30 dex roughly to equip some dex gems I had on support gems. And so this requires you to get another 15 strength and another 20 dex. This can be done with gem corruptions, or just if you randomly roll dex on like your ring or strength on your ring, something like that. You have to swap around your attributes a little bit to equip it. So there's some opportunity cost there. And number two is if you stick with the hybrid tank version where you have Everlasting Gaze and you're quite a bit tankier, it will lose you a bit of energy shield. For example, When I tested this before I swapped my tree around, I can't show you now because I already swapped the whole tree and I don't want to respec it for the video. But for example, when I had 5800 ES, when I swapped my 1000 ES chest piece I have here for this Warriors, I went to about 5000 ES. It was basically an 800 ES drop without swapping the tree around. So it'll lose you ES, but here's the upside. It's very competitive in terms of mana. You'll see we have a 6500 mana pool. You can beat it with something like this, which is a 1000 ES chest piece, 300 mana better. But if you compare it to something like a 700 ES chest piece, it's 300 or 400 mana better than a 700 ES chest piece. I believe it's roughly comparable to about an 850 ES chest piece. But the thing is, getting an 850 ES chest piece with 50 spirit is very expensive. And then I'll compare also to a 4-socket. If you're thinking, okay, 5 sockets too expensive, 4-socket's also quite good. 4-socket will get you to around 6,300, which should be comparable to about a 750 ES chest piece, I believe, roughly, just to give you some numbers to work with. The point is, you need roughly 60 spirit for cast on shock, and ideally, if you can get to 70, another 10 spirit on top of that, you can include clarity onto your Archmage links, which allows for additional mana regen. So upsides are, it's kind of cheap. Like if you look at trade right now, if we pull it up on trade, Warriors Invictus, 4-socket, it's a 1 divine chest piece, and then you throw in about 1 divine of percent mana soul cores. Or comparatively, if you're trying to get a similar chest piece in terms of an ES chest piece, we need to get to around, I think it's like 700, 730-ish probably is roughly what we need to get about it. This is quite a bit more expensive. So it's just there as a budget option. But if you have a 4-socket Warriors, it's going to be comparable to a 40 spirit 750 ES chest piece, just to give you some numbers to work with. Ultimately, when it comes down to what is the best thing to use, if I had a perfectly crafted rare chest piece, that would be better than Warriors because you can get 60 spirit. I think you could get close to 900 ES with a perfectly crafted and corrupted chest piece, but just trying to give you some numbers. Warriors is competitive with a very good chest piece. This is competitive with an 800 ES chest piece with 50 spirit, for example. Well, I didn't mean to open up a separate browser. Let me just pull up the one I had here. So for example, if we took this chest piece and all of a sudden we said, okay, I want at least 50 spirit and I want closer to 800 ES, which is when you start to actually get more competitive mana-wise, all of a sudden the price goes through the roof. As a counterpoint, of course, I will show you the 5-socket Warriors just to compare budget-wise, 15 divines versus 30. Ultimately, it comes down to price. You can corrupt your own Warriors as well. That is also an option. It's about a 1 in 4, I believe, to hit +1 corruptions. But hopefully that gives you some context. Warriors is ultimately, I think, a very cost-effective option, but it depends on what your budget is. So plan that out based on what you know. Getting cast on shock, from what I can tell, is a very big damage improvement. And I probably should have done it earlier. I was a bit too stubborn about it. So yeah, I wanted to showcase that. And now, finally, I want to talk about the tree, because you may notice the tree is different here. Why is that? When you swap Everlasting Gaze out, that is your only source of energy shield. When you're giving that up to go for a damage amulet, no longer are percent energy shield nodes relevant. So all of the nodes we had that gave us stun threshold based on ES, that gave us ES, all those nodes we took out of the tree, earlier pathing nodes, and we went straight into damage. You effectively get to take all your defensive spec and say, hey, I want to spec damage, 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 and guess what? More damage. What that ends up meaning is you also change out your rare jewels. For example, on my character, I had a bunch of rare jewels, and most of them I tried to get ES on because ES is very valuable for me defensively, so I tried to get ES. Once I was taking out that chest piece, or taking out the, not chest piece, Everlasting Gaze. It's like a chest piece with how much ES it gives you. But once I was taking that out, I no longer cared about ES, and I had to restructure my jewels. You can do this with either a bunch of like just 3-stat to 4-stat rare jewels, or I opted to try out an adorned setup where I only need to get 2 socket jewels, or basically 2 affix jewels, magic jewels. What this ends up doing is adorned cost a lot of money. I had to spend about 20 divines to get this adorned. And then all of my jewels got cheaper. The counterpoint is you could buy a bunch of quad damage jewels, but each jewel will be expensive individually. So you gotta weigh out the pros and cons. It depends how easily you can snipe some good DPS jewels, but those are the 2 options. Basically, when you swap to DPS setup, you want 4 damage stats on all your jewels. Shock, magnitude, crit damage, crit chance, LE damage, spell damage, stuff like that is what you end up wanting. And I have updated that on the planner. You'll notice here, I've also added some FAQ questions about filter, about against darkness jewel, about the cast on shock lightning conduit. I've added a trade search for Warriors Invictus with the 2 stats we care about, which is mana per soul core and spirit per soul core. And then on top of that, I have also added a tree for the DPS setup. For those of you curious that just want to go full DPS. And I want to preface here, this part says not recommended, as in I don't recommend it. Real quick, that is specifically because when you do this, you make your character vulnerable to stun and to freeze. If you are fully competent, if you're fully aware of what you're doing, you're not going to die at all because you're killing everything before it sees you. But if you want to be able to relax a little bit, you know, stand in a on death effect or just, you know, chill. The thing is, the moment you mess up, you're going to get stun locked, you're going to get frozen, and you'll eventually die to that. So I just want to preface that the full DPS setup, although it's very good and can work fine as a playstyle, it has a specific weakness to stun and to freeze. There are options to help solve that. Number one is Dream Fragments, cost about 80 or 90 D, I don't know, it's expensive, which solves freeze and chill. And number two is a high rolled stun charm. If you get increased charges on your stun charm, this can roll up to 120 charges, which gives you 3 uses. That plus Dream Fragments will work decently, but just keep in mind you are giving up some of that defensive tank as well as giving up some of your mana sustain to do it. So I just want to preface that if you were thinking about the DPS setup, there are downsides, but that is not going to stop me from showing you what I think is a fairly optimized DPS setup. Outside of that, I have also added to the skill gem section, we have the early gems, we have the stuff that's set up for Ellie Storm, we have the stuff that's set up for Double Shock, and now we have a cast on shock setup. Ultimately, this is just changing around the links a little bit. The main thing that's different between the Double Shock and the cast on shock setup is we take considered casting, which we were using on Spark, and we're putting on cast on shock for just full DPS, and then we're just putting mobility on our Spark. From my experience so far, this chain node clear feels amazing. I don't feel like I'm ever lacking clear at this point with these chain nodes. And with mobility, you can end up just moving faster. That is what I would 100% be doing if I had a 6-link to put on my cast on shock, but I don't because I'm a cheapskate. So anyways, that is the updates to the DPS variation of the build and some of your basically other options you have on the character and how to get this going. Now I'll give you guys a little showcase of, we'll do a boss fight. I'm gonna swap over to the controller because that's what I've been doing for all my gameplay. I am a controller addict at this point. There are definitely some points of frustration with inventory management, but man, does it feel smooth on most other, like, I don't know, variety of things we do. We'll do I have a T16 anywhere? Have I corrupted a T16 recently? It does not look like I have a T16. Unless I'm blind. Okay, we don't have a T16. We'll just do a T15 with whatever this is. This is a tier 15 with an irradiated zone and a map boss. We'll just give you a look at what the gameplay looks like when playing this character. It's pretty much just pre-fire everything. Things die around the corner and life is chill. If I lose focus though, I can get frozen, I can get stun locked, and that's something we have to consider. But essentially, we'll just walk around. Oh, one thing is, just a random side note about Delirium is, I don't know if anyone else thinks this way, but is it annoying to anyone else that the monsters from Delirium spawn in untargetable and get to push your character around? It is one of my personal biggest pet peeves of the game currently, is I want to run Delirium because it's got good loot. You get a lot of splinters from it, but every time you run into the little mirror thing, it spawns monsters that you cannot target, and they just get to forcibly push your character around. Like, look at this. They get to spawn in. That was like 2 seconds before I got to deal damage to him. It drives me crazy every single time. Just a random little side tangent, I guess. Not really related to the character, but I wanted to say because it's, I don't know. It's just on my mind. I'm hoping I like the idea of like a big boss being able to push you around, but a random tiny little monster that I can't target being able to push my character around. It just does not feel good in my opinion in terms of gameplay. But yeah, anyways, as you can see, the gameplay, as I was saying before, is pretty much everything dies off screen if you're playing properly. I know I can teleport so that I'm on screen of the enemies, but they're instantaneously dead, and that's just, maybe that can be seen as a good thing, which it means we've succeeded at making a powerful character. But it's also so good clear, it feels like I'm walking through an empty game to some extent. because whatever monsters were there are just instantaneously dead, right? You know, there's not the feeling of opposition or fighting a monster or anything like that. So, needless to say, I think we are on the... oh, I'm going to go back and get those maps. Nah, I don't need to. It's really easy to sustain maps. If you're having trouble sustaining maps, by the way, all you have to do is use your maps that have a high waystone chance to drop on the boss zones. Easily you'll over sustain while doing that. Every time I get to... if I'm feeling like I'm not sustaining my maps, I'll just chuck a couple exalts, go for a bit of a map waystone chance, and then do a boss zone on it. Or you could just do the alchemy that gives all suffixes, the omen for alchemy or whatever that gives suffixes. Use that on white map. 3 suffixes, I believe, will give you like 300% waystone drop chance. And then if you start speccing more nodes on your tree, for example, like we did... oh, we're already completed with the map. Like we did, then you get some multiplier on your mod effect that ends up making you get more and more waystone drop chance. Anyways, that's a lot of side tangents and stuff. This is the DPS version as promised. The main changes are essentially an amulet plus a body armor with spirit. Warriors is a great option in terms of budget, but ultimately super late game, a perfectly rolled rare, I believe, should beat this. So amulet can be plus all or plus 3 proj. Plus 3 proj will only apply to your spark, where plus 3 all will apply to your spark and your lightning conduit, so it's a bit more ideal. As well as mana, spirit, percent mana, cast speed, stats like that, mana regen will all be quite useful. So anyways, this was showcasing the DPS version of the Stormweaver Archmage. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. As always, thanks for watching. And until next time, I'm going to be working on the Stormweaver full guide. Take care, Exiles, and peace out.